Hello, and this is a book review. Some interesting ideas that I found in this book/course, Transformational Leadership, How Leaders Change Teams, Companies, and Organizations. I'll just refer to this as a book, even though it's a course, even though it's an audio, just refer it as a book. So I'll start with a quick review about this book. Probably 3 stars, so he has some interesting ideas. Definitely, but sometimes his lectures are a little disorganized and you're not sure what's the point, what's the end point. And some lectures are like not so great, could be better. Some of them are much better than the rest. Probably 3, maybe he's touching into 3.5, but he's not getting a 4. So let's see the notes. An organization that relies on the geniuses on the top will not endure. So if that's the only thing the company is relying on, only on geniuses, usually they won't endure. Oftentimes, the CEO in a company is the success of the CEO in a company is due to the surroundings team rather than its own traits. Some people only attribute the success to the CEO, but sometimes and many times, the success is actually attributed also to the teams, the surroundings team that is surrounding the CEO. There is no particular trait that is successful to be a leader. Many different traits could be successful as leaders. So many people think that you have to be charismatic, you have to be extroverted, and many other traits that you must have it in order to be a successful leader. But he debunks all of those. He has some examples even and studies, and there is no specific trait that you must have. There is too much success that is attributed to the CEO. In general, different fields, for example, have higher or lower returns in by definition. So he brings the where you see it the most is in airlines, where usually have lower returns, and that shouldn't mean that the CEO of that company is doing poorly than his counterpart in a different company that is not airlines. So sometimes it's just different fields are harder than the rest. We might attribute too much success to the CEO's charisma. So again, charisma is not what contributes to success. It could contribute, but not necessarily. People are fundamentally resist to change for a variety of reasons. But if we describe the change as an opportunity rather than a threat, people are more likely to proceed. So it all depends about how you describe it. If it's a threat, you don't have to say it's a threat, but if it's described as a threat, people will resist the change. But if you describe it as a change, they're more likely to proceed. When persuading someone, talking to a rational side will only do a small part of the work, as most of the job has to be directed toward the emotional side of people. So going to the rational part of people might do some of the work, but usually people have to be addressed to the part of them that is emotional. That's important. As a rational person, I forget that often. Some people, or many people, even for me, maybe even to persuade me, you have to be more emotional. So it's always good to remember. The law of unintended consequences refers to what happens, for example, if a company rewards programmers per lines of code. They just write a lot of inefficient code. So that's the law. It's a known law, unintended consequences, but he has a good example. So an example is if you reward programmers per line of code. So you give them just the more lines you write, the more money you get. This is what the programmers think. And what happens is just write shitty code, inefficient, and they get a lot of money. But the code you get is low in quality. Teams with pay gaps perform better than teams that have equal pay. That was a little surprising. Usually you say they all have the same. And I even thought, even for me, when I work, it doesn't feel good if you have someone that gets better, gets paid more than you. But it has some studies to support that if you have a pay gap, that team will perform better. And he cites the idea of competition. So you have more competition, which helps push the team forward. When the leader is engaging in political activity, is a distraction for him and also time consuming. So there is more and more companies right now in the market that are being active politically. I think even Apple recently saw Levi's. So there is a lot of companies that are, more and more companies that are engaging in political activity. But he says it's, first of all, it's distraction for the CEO, and it's also time consuming for the CEO, so they might do poorly on performance in general. A great leader is not using his power, rather he is persuading others. So he's not using the power to influence others, he's persuading them, not using his authority. Consulting firms are taking your watch and telling you what time it is. They're often being hired to be the scapegoat, as leaders don't want to take extreme measures themselves. So I like this idea of they take your watch and tell you what time is it. That's the idea of consulting. It's usually you don't find like like a very transformable information. So they just tell you what time it is. And many times the sole reason that they're hired in the first place is to be that scapegoat. Because there is a problem, you bring a consultation firm, and then you said, oh, that's what they said, so the leader can, so it's not the leader himself. So the leader don't want to be the one that takes that extreme measures, it's the consulting firm. I like this idea. After people make a bet, they are more sure about winning as they rationalize their decision. So after you make the bet, you will rationalize it, and you're therefore more confident and more sure about your bet that you're going to win. Reciprocation is deeply embedded within us. When we get things for free at Trader Joe's, for example, we feel somewhat obliged to buy something. And I find it true that if you get something for free, you're more likely, you feel a little obliged to buy something in return. So that's kind of a reciprocation idea. So it's always working. As leaders, we don't want to be liked by everyone. We want to be respected. Not get too close to your troops. That's the idea. Not getting too close to your troops. You don't want to be liked by everyone. First of all, it's not likely. But what you do want to push for is to be respected. As a leader, you need to show people that some situations are non-zero-sum game. Both sides might benefit. People are prone and have a proclivity to think that usually every situation, it's a zero-sum game. But as a leader, you need to understand that sometimes it's a non-zero-sum game, and both sides might win. So if you identify them and then tell all parties involved that this is a non-zero-sum game, how both sides might benefit, that could be good, and that's what a great leader is doing. The team stability, which means the need to know each other a little bit, is more important than being rested, for example. So you have the studies. So if a team that is rested, well rested, or a team that have higher or good stability, so stability is more important than other things, or in this example is rested. The perfect team size is between 4 to 7 members. More than that is starting to be inefficient. One of the reasons there are bigger teams in political reasons. Less accountability, less risk, and more knowledge. So first of all is The perfect size for a team, based on research, is 4 to 7 members. More than that, you start to be inefficient, and I think the next note is talking about it a little more in depth. But let's go back here. So one of the reasons there are bigger teams, usually there's bigger teams than 7, sometimes even 20 and even bigger, is usually due to political reasons, less accountability. So if there's more people, there is less accountability. Instead of you taking that responsibility, you bring another person that shares the responsibility with you. So many people are doing the same. So there's more people, less risk, same idea kind of, and more knowledge. So usually you want more knowledge to bring into the group. So you will be more sophisticated in some way, but usually it's not really helpful. And the perfect size is 4 to 7. Homogeneous versus heterogeneous teams. If there is too little diversity, there is groupthink. When there is too much diversity, interpersonal conflict usually arises. So that's the difference between homogeneous to heterogeneous teams. So if there is too little diversity, so if it's homogeneous, there is groupthink, everyone thinks the same, there is no diversity in thought. But if there is too much diversity, usually there is some conflict and you don't go anywhere. The way we ask questions could destroy answers. When we ask questions with presuppositions, people answer differently. So the way you ask the question, if you have presuppositions, that will affect the answer. So it's really hard in general to ask the right questions that will not entail some kind of answer. One of the reasons the army is so good, because they are learning from mistakes. They're not trying to understand what turns wrong, cause and effect, not blaming the people who are responsible. So they're not working, they're not playing the blaming game. This is one of the reasons they're so good in what they're doing, because they're learning from their mistakes by not blaming others. They look for cause and effect, not who to blame. You can always find whoever did it and try to make it work, but there is no blaming game. It's more about finding what went wrong and how to fix it. Transaction cost refers to the idea that in some situations the market is not the best solution, and it's not always the solution. Some things are done better by organizations. So transaction cost, that's the idea of some things are just not meant to work in a market. Sometimes you have to have an organization to work it out and not a market. I don't have any examples, but I think he has some in the book. Procter & Gamble used outside sources to find innovations, as they understood that their researchers are limited. They outsourced innovations by at least 50%. So this is, I think maybe they're the first one that did this idea, but right now there's more and more companies. Netflix is one of the major ones that benefited from this. Outsourcing your needs. So do some studies. This is what Netflix did. They outsourced someone that will make a better algorithm to recommend what to watch next, or what will be good for you. So this is what Procter and Gamble did. They outsourced some of the research idea or how to solve some problems, and by at least 50%, and that helped them to innovate, or just in innovations in general. Because even though you have very smart people, they're limited in some way. If you outsource it, you have more people, much more diversity, and you might be onto something. Rapid CEO changes causes the people in charge to make serious changes in the last year in office, and oftentimes they don't have enough time to prove themselves. So if we change, there is a rapid change of CEOs. They do radical things to prove them, to show like in the last year what they did, but it's not necessarily good in the long term. So they do like a very, very short term just to look better, especially if they're looking afterwards for another job, or just to like everyone to remember them in a good way. And I think that's the last one here. Some companies are already starting to implement learning through experience rather than through class or speeches. Even for leaders, contemplating on a real-life problem is much more beneficial. So that's the idea of learning through experience. I think I have a whole video about it probably somewhere down there. So learning through experience is much more important, and it's much more beneficial, which is like, this is not what's going on today in colleges, but some companies, especially for leaders, or not especially, but even for leaders, contemplating on real life problems, it's more beneficial than learning theory. Learning theory is not necessarily will help you in real life, so it's better to do that in real life. So that's here for notes. Again, so there are some good ideas, but could be better, better organized, better organization, and more effectivity, or more usefulness. Some more, some less. And thank you.